Welcome, welcome, welcome to New Pathways for Equity and Impact in Early Childhood. This is a big deal. We are so pleased to have you with us, both those of you who are here in person and everyone out there in internet land on the live stream. My name is Eric Abrams, and I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer here at the Stanford Graduate School of Education. I will also be your Master of Ceremonies today. Dr. Fisher, Phil asked me to be here today because equity and inclusion are truly at the core of the work of the Stanford Center on Early Childhood. We cannot find the solutions to the most pressing problems facing the lives of young children without first acknowledging the deep systemic and structural inequalities that perpetuate these issues. It should not require luck for a low-income kid to have a shot. It should not require the lightning strike of having a mother who founded a preschool for a kid to learn how to read. Imagine a child whose family moves a lot, who goes to 4 grade schools and 2 high schools, but just through luck, each of those schools and each of those homes is in walking distance of a solid, functional public library. This isn't fiction, I was that kid. And 3 of those libraries that I could walk to as a kid are closed now. I think this is why I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to help guide everyone through a series of panels and showcases. We're going to hear today about some incredible new approaches to addressing inequities in early childhood, innovations in the way that we think about childcare, and an exciting window into the alignment of pediatric and early childhood learning systems, and new ways of measuring impact of early childhood programs. Additionally, you'll have the opportunity to hear about 2 local schools with Stanford connections that are rethinking how learning happens. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a couple of housekeeping details. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. If you need to pop outside to take a call or use the facilities which are right outside these doors, please feel free to do so. If you have a question for one of our Q&A sessions, we encourage you to submit it online by scanning the QR code in the program, or you can just raise your hand during a Q&A period and one of my colleagues will come find you and have a microphone for you to ask the questions. The programs also include our hashtag in case you'd like to share anything on social media, as well as complete bios for all of our participants. I am energized by the people in this room and the connections that we're going to make today. Both our audience and our speakers include early childhood educators, researchers, pediatricians, and philanthropists, and other stakeholders from both the private and the public sectors. It's going to take this kind of interdisciplinary, multifaceted approach to move the needle on the toughest problems facing the youngest members of our society. And once again, thank you all for being here today. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our dean, Dan Schwartz. He's not just our dean, he's my boss, and I also consider him a friend. He is the dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford and the Nomellini and Olivier Professor of Educational Technology. Dean Schwartz is also leader of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, which houses the Stanford Center on Early Childhood. Without further ado, Dean Schwartz.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Eric. Eric, I think you should just give my talk. I think it'd be like twice as good. Hello, everyone. It's so good. I really appreciate it. So today we're celebrating the launch of a new Stanford Center on Early Childhood. We announced the center on social media a few days ago, and someone posted the reply in the comments, "It's about time," they said. So it is about time, but it's not out of nowhere. So I thought it might be helpful to describe the larger university commitment and the process that led to the formation of the center. And so I'm going to start with the university vision, then the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, and then the Stanford Center on Early Childhood. And so I'm being very deanly as I do this. So there are a lot of faculty at Stanford that work on early childhood, and bringing them all together to move the field of scholarship and practice started about 7 years ago in the before time. So I want you to sit back as I tell you the tale, okay? So it begins, part of it, that Stanford has a new president, Marc Tessier-Levine. And when you have a new president, comes a period of visioning, right? And so Stanford has been a pioneer multiple times. For example, it was the first university to develop very strong partnerships with industry. And this occurred during World War II, largely through its emphasis on engineering and technology. And this arguably led to Silicon Valley. Later, Stanford was a pioneer in interdisciplinary work, which many other universities are now imitating. And this is possible. If you want to know the secret, having all the schools co-located makes a difference. So we're all in the same place, so it's easy to collaborate across lines. And then there are hidden administrative moves like central budgeting, so that schools don't compete with one another. So given these important contributions of Stanford as a leader among universities, what should it do? And so you're the president, and you've got to solve this problem. So Marc's vision was the concept of a purposeful university. In particular, universities should be purposeful in generating benefits to humanity, right? And so one solution to this was to develop accelerators. Their goal is to help researchers move their discoveries into practice and greater knowledge production. So it's a way to help faculty and students surpass themselves by providing support where they can't do it on their own. So I just want to give one quick example of this. At the start of the pandemic, we generated a seed grant program for people who are going to try and solve things with technology to help in this time of crisis. And a music professor, Chris Chafee, developed a way to do simultaneous music performances on home broadband. And I don't know how I did this because home broadband's too slow, but somehow he solved this problem. And so he came to us and he said, well, I want somebody to use this. So we provided him entree with partners, right? And then we helped him design a curriculum that he could use for this to get these kids with the joy of music. So we're debriefing, he and all the other seed grantees, and he's explaining, and I'm just blown away by what he's done. And I say to him, would you like to know if this worked? Like if it made a difference? And he looked at me and he said, Dan, I'm a music professor. I'm not a social scientist. Of course I want to know, but I have no idea how to do it. This is what accelerators do, right? We now are working with him to help him discover, did it make a difference and how can he improve it? So the new vision for the modern university is that eventually each school or department has an accelerator attached to it, maybe in the basement or something, you know. And so currently there are 4 accelerators in Stanford's long-range plan: sustainability, innovative medicines, social impact labs, and then why we're here today, the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. And the accelerator is attached to the Graduate School of Education, but it recruits and serves faculty from all 7 schools. So then, why did we succeed in getting an accelerator for learning within this larger plan? An easy answer is that the cause is noble. Who can argue with improving learning? It's correlated with just about every positive outcome. It's unevenly distributed, and so there's incredible disparities. It's very righteous. But then, you know, physical activity is correlated with a lot of good things too. We could have an accelerator on physical activity. So why learning? In particular, most universities who invest in learning are focused on their own undergraduate courses in the undergraduate experience. And here we have a major university initiative on learning across the spectrum of life, in school and out. So this is really distinct. And I think a key answer to this is that there are reasons to believe universities can make a difference in learning where they could not before. And there are these game changers that are occurring that can break the general lassitude of education towards change. So one of the big ones is data. This is a big game changer. Education has always been evidence impoverished. And evidence not only helps you do discovery, it also helps you do continual improvement. And without data, it's really hard to do this. So I have an analogy. A colleague of mine studies clinical psychology. And he points out clinical psychology helps. It really does. But practitioners who've been doing it for 20 years are no better than practitioners who've been out for a year. So how is this possible? 20 years and they haven't gotten better. The answer was there were no systems of feedback. They would treat their patients would go out and they wouldn't come back. And so the clinical psychologists, of course, assume what I'm doing is working because they didn't come back, right? And so they fixed this, right? What they did is they put ways to track patients after they left to bring objective measures back to the clinical psychologists so they could improve on their job. So I was explaining this story to a kindergarten teacher, and a kindergarten teacher is really like teaching Professor Dan a lesson or two. And the kindergarten teacher looks at me and says, Dan, finish this for me. Practice makes, and I suckered and I said, perfect. She said, no, practice makes permanent unless there's rich amounts of feedback, right? So data makes a big change at the individual level, at the system level, through the whole thing. And you're going to see great examples of that. Another great game changer, technology. I probably don't need to hit this one too hard. You've seen what's happened at COVID with Zoom, and it's amazing possibilities, not just for increasing access, but for designing fundamentally new ways of helping people to learn. There's a growing work in brain and learning sciences that targets what are the mechanisms behind learning. And once you know mechanisms, you can be very precise in trying to address them, right? Because you can go after the thing that makes learning difficult. And then finally, data, technology, science that's growing up around learning, and then a growing belief we can and must address the stark disparities in learning. And what's my evidence of that? You're all here, right? And so that's good. So put together, I think these create the conditions for a revolution in how we understand and deliver learning. And it's important to recognize Stanford's not alone, but it may be the first university to recognize now's the time to make a difference and go to scale. So the for-profit sector has taken notice as well. So 10 years ago, there were 0 unicorns in education. Now there are 54 new education companies valued at over $1 billion. So there's new players, right, to help make a change. So all the accelerators have a number of features. They work to recruit interdisciplinary expertise across the university. They provide resources for researchers to surpass their own expertise. And they have the goal of bringing solutions to the benefit of humanity. To improve learning specifically, the Stanford Accelerator for Learning has 3 key features. One is it tries to bring together science so we understand and can really use evidence to figure things out, and design so you can make things that are actually useful, whether they're policies, technologies, practices for the classroom. So we bring these 2 kinds of expertise together. This is a way to accelerate solutions. A second is partnerships. You'll hear a lot about partnerships. There's a lot of good reasons to do them. The simplest is if you're trying to design, you have to design for a specific context. And so you need the partners to design for that context. And then finally, the third pillar, science and design, partnerships, is learner-centered. It seems obvious, but a lot of discussions about education might be labor-centered, or they might be curriculum-centered. You can imagine the English department debates Shakespeare or Chaucer, which is the required course. That's curriculum-centered. This is learner-centered. And so we have efforts on children with learning disabilities, workforce, disenfranchised children. Here we have an effort on early childhood. right? And I think for this crowd, I don't need to motivate why early childhood. I think in the following presentations, you're going to see very strong examples of where science meets design, where partnership shapes scholarship and impact, and where data, technology, and new science bring about utterly novel possibilities in understanding and practice. You'll also see the impressive array of disciplinary scholars and institutions that are engaged and ready to learn from one another. So I have to do justice to the kind of work that went behind this. In advance of developing the center, there's a faculty task force that helped to lay out the landscape, started in 2015. And in faculty meetings, they're sitting in the back tapping their toes. When's it going to happen? And I say, all good things take time. And here we are, right? We're finally launching something that is going to be amazing. So an early childhood center that engages multiple disciplines and stakeholders with the enticements of the possibilities of game-changing synergies between research and practice, this is exhilarating. There is no other effort like it, and it's very Stanford. It is rigorous, relevant, daring, and optimistic. So I'm so glad you're all here for the launch of the effort that can change the world. You know, when I think of the imperative of sustainability, I think about educated adults who can sustain a society and a world we want for our children. And notably, the education of these future adults start when they are young children, right now. So we can do something special together, and thank you for joining us today. So I had a little more, but I don't know if you can see this. You know, somewhere like 5 minutes ago, I noticed, hey, that red light's blinking. I wonder what it means. So, okay. So before I step away from the stage, I need to thank Phil Fisher for his leadership in this initiative and all of our faculty. Today you're going to hear from a number of the faculty who were on the original task force that helped bring to light the imperative to develop this center. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Joan Lombardi. So we're very fortunate to have Joan as a visiting scholar at the Stanford Center on Early Childhood. Joan is a leading international expert on child development and social policy. She served in both the Obama and Clinton administrations. It was the founding chair of the Birth to Five Policy Alliance and the founder of Global Leaders for Young Children. She's a senior scholar at the Center for Child and Human Development and a senior fellow with the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues at Georgetown University. Joan, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, get 'em.
Let's give it up for Dean Schwartz. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership and for your recognition that early childhood is the foundation for learning. And every time that happens, every time something like that happens, it's a metaphor for the change that has finally happened in the field and the recognition for an issue that has been long overdue. It is humbling for both Phil and I to see you all here today, first of all, in 3 dimensions, which is really exciting. And, you know, I feel like it's a quilt of people who are stitching it together for children for decades and decades and decades. So please, thank you, and thank each other for the work that you've done for so many years. We are here to celebrate young children. What draws us to them? It's the exuberant joy they bring us, it's the vulnerabilities, and it's their potentialities. We have to consider all of these qualities as we start this new chapter to promote healthy child development, support families, and recognize and value those who care for them. Something new is never quite new. Something that seems to be beginning always comes with a history that stamps the future in subtle ways and in sometimes dramatic ways. I want to talk about 3 things very briefly. I want to reflect on history, explicitly call out the realities that we're facing, and we all know what those realities are, and turn to the principles and potentials that will guide this new center. And yesterday we had this wonderful advisory committee meeting, our first, and when I went around asking people, when you think about this center, what do you think about? And the one word that kind of came to me after that was, it's a gathering place. And this today is a gathering place of all of that. So that's a big, my short talk is really a preface to a set of panels. So you're going to hear some themes that will unfold throughout the day. So let me start with history. It's been interesting in the field. Someone once said to me, early childhood has three mothers: health, education, social services, family support. But in the history of each of those disciplines, they often didn't come together. And that's been one of the challenges that we've faced, whether it be the kindergarten movement in the 1800s, whether it be the 1909 White House conference that brought together social workers concerned about the welfare of children, or the 1935 Maternal and Child Health Act, which was a landmark early childhood effort. The list is too long for me to catalog here, and we all know that among many of those movements, the history of the country was still full of racial inequality. And so when we think about where the field went after those individual disciplines, I think what we saw was finally those things coming together. And today marks that same coming together. This is one of the original posters from Head Start. Those children are probably 60 now, so don't look for them on the street. But I keep it there because I remember reading, I shared this with Phil, I took out the original Cook memo. Dr. Cook was the pediatrician that Sergeant Shriver called when he wanted to come up with the vision of Head Start. And when you read that document, which was released in 1965, so when we think we're doing something new, and it said things like, it's clear services must be comprehensive, involving activities generally associated with the fields of health, social services, and education, 1965. So we're building on that history. Secondly, neurons to neighborhoods. What a revolutionary landmark report, and I am thrilled that one of the major co-authors of that report, Deborah Phillips, a great Stanford alum, is with us today. Deborah, really, what that report did was say there's a common science to all of this. That's why, I hope I'm saying it right, Deborah, that's why we celebrate all of those, because children are developing with that common science. And then finally, I had to put up there, because I do a lot of global work, the Nurturing Care Framework that UNICEF and WHO released in 2018, which brings nutrition, health, responsive parenting, safety and security, early learning together in one framework. This is progress that we can build on with this center. At the same time, so we've had progress, but we have ongoing debates. I love Chaucer versus Shakespeare. Well, we have lots of those debates in the early childhood field, whether it be what's more important, the primacy of the family or supporting the family? What's more important, supply or demand? What should we do, target or universal? Should we do infants and toddlers, or should we do preschool children? What we know is we should do all of that. And it's not an either-or debate, although we've been having endless debates. The yellow report on the top of that slide is the FIDCR standards, the Federal Interagency Child Care Standards, 1972. So we've had these same debates over and over again, not only in policy, but in practice. Play versus academics, it's both. Phonics versus whole world, it's both. And so our history has been marked by these debates, which brings me to the realities. This is from the Innocenti research report that looks at how we're doing in wealthy countries. And you know, if you can read that little writing, 41 countries, where's the United States on its care policies? Number 40. We can do better than that, and we want to send that message throughout the history of this new center. At the same time, I want to mention just two realities that I think we're facing. First of all, and I'm using this, I put this in quote, enduring inequities, the Center for the Study of Child Care and Employment, and I know Leah is here with us today, uses this term to describe the history of the field. And we know that the younger you are in the United States, the poorer you are. For Black and Latino children, the disparities are much more significant. Maternal mortality levels among Black mothers is at tragic levels. We can do better than that. Early childhood teachers, community health workers, even pediatricians go unrecognized. The child care worker today makes a fraction of what a preschool teacher makes, and then in turn, a preschool teacher makes a fraction of what a kindergarten teacher makes, and it goes on and on. We've lost 100,000 child care workers since the end of the pandemic. And you'll hear more about these realities as we hear the speakers. So that's one of our realities of today. The other is that we live in an age of uncertainty. And will we be able to come to this meeting in person or not? Will I be able to go to work tomorrow in person or not? We had, and many of you know, and Phil talked a lot more about the RAPID study that we've been doing. I'll read you one quote from one parent. She said this to us. We ask open-ended questions. Between political tension, climate change, war, and all the school shootings, I fear for my children's future. They're going to have a much harder childhood than I did. We have to help parents plan for a world they can't even imagine. So the uncertainty is everywhere, including whether your teacher will be there Monday morning because she had to get a new job because she couldn't afford to stay anymore. And so these are just some of the realities, but let me be positive. This is a baby coming home for the first time from the hospital. And in that face, I think we see the potential of this effort, and that all children, regardless of how they're born or what they have when they come, we should have high expectations for them. If we think about this as an age of possibilities, we have new tools and approaches which you'll hear from. The Dean talked about partnerships. We can't do this without you, without everybody across the country. Phil and I just spent a few weeks listening to communities across the country. We have so much to learn and so many ways that we can work together. We have a better understanding of the pathways. So what communities are telling us is they want the whole continuum. They don't just want a piece of it, because families want the whole continuum. We want healthy pregnancies and births, thriving children at 3. We have to define that and figure out how to collect data on it. We want eager, engaged, curious, and capable children at 5. And we want successful children in school and well-rounded. I mean, I think, and caring. If there's anything we need in this country right now, it's people that care. So these are visions that come out of communities. I didn't just make them up. And we want goals for the caregivers, for their well-being at home, for their economic well-being at home, and for the economic well-being of the providers that are taking care of their children each day, and equity across all of that. We've got the ingredients for success, and I think if we have the wisdom to learn, the courage to ask each other for advice, and we put that together, we'll make this a success. One of my very favorite books is Composing a Life by Mary Catherine Bateman, and she said this in the beginning of her book. She said, nothing ever, get it exactly right. The materials and skills from which a life is composed are no longer clear. It no longer is possible to follow the path of previous generations. Our lives not only take on new directions, but they are subject to repeated redirection. And that's what we have to do. We have to repeatedly look for new ways of finding success for children and for us. We want to know from you at the end of the day and when you go home, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? Even in this meeting, what did we miss? What new challenges do you face? And how can we learn from you and with you? So I'm going to turn to, I don't have a yellow ribbon to cut to start this, because we don't think it's just in a building. But I chose a picture that I love. This is dawn at a beach that I walk on a lot. And for me, it's full of hope and potential, just like the founder of this center is full of hope and potential. There's very little I can say about Phil Fisher, except for I met him in March of 2020 when COVID was just starting, as the world was shutting down, and he asked me to chair the Rapid Advisory. And I want to shout out to the amazing Rapid staff and the Rapid Advisory team. Wow. We journeyed together, we thought together, we struggled together, we laughed together, but it was Phil Fisher's wisdom, his quest for knowledge, his ability to reflect that really made all the difference. Join me in welcoming the first and founding director of the Stanford Center for Early Childhood, Dr. Phil Fisher.
Awesome. Really, really nice. Thank you, Joan. What a pleasure to be here, to see everybody here. The sense of energy and of commitment to early childhood and to moving the field forward is palpable here in the room. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 additional people who are listening in online. This is a moment that I think we should all take in and remember as a really important moment for the field. I want to begin with some acknowledgements. First of all, thank you to Dean Schwartz. Where we are today in terms of the launch of the center in the context of this amazing entity, the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, is in and of itself, I think, groundbreaking. Early childhood is way too often, as you will hear throughout the day, siloed, separated from other sectors in a way that is to the detriment of everyone, of society, of children, of families, and of other adults and kids' lives. The fact that the Stanford Center on Early Childhood exists within an accelerator for learning that covers the entire lifespan and thinks across disciplines is truly transformative. So thank you, Dean Schwartz, and thanks for that great welcome. Thank you to Joan Lombardi, my partner in crime for the last couple of years. We realized when we started working together that we had been in very, very close orbits, but had never met. And I think that the work that we've done together has been really transformative for both of us. And also, Joan probably knows 90% of the people in this room very personally and closely. So as a connector, which is an essential factor in our field, I think really essential that Joan is here and participating in the center as we get going. I also just want to acknowledge, and I think Joan highlighted this is a beginning, but it's also a continuation. There is nothing particularly new about what we're starting today. These ideas have been around for decades, in some instances for over a century. And so what we are doing is, I think, really moving the energy closer together and moving it forward. But we're not the first, we won't be the last. It's many lifetimes of work that will get us to where we need to get. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. And then I really want to acknowledge all of the people who have made this event come together, which I know from being behind the scenes a bit has required long hours, a couple of car accidents actually along the way. Everybody's fine, but so I just want to give a round of applause to everybody who's contributed. Thank you. And I want to echo what Joan said, and we'll be saying this throughout the day, that this is not just an opportunity for us to come together. We're treating this as a very important information gathering session for the work that we're going to be doing. So this is not a situation where we want you to sit and be passive and listen. We want you to contribute. There are a number of opportunities where you'll be able to, through QR codes, to allow us to get information from you about what you think are priorities for the field and where we need to go. And please do that. We need your input. This will be truly a collective effort moving forward, and everybody in this room, I hope, will be a part of that effort. So I'm going to go really quickly through the front end of my slides, because if you don't know these things, you probably shouldn't be here, because this is all about early childhood. So first and foremost, we know that early childhood is an essential period to focus on, in part because the tremendous amount of brain development that occurs in the early years. Joan mentioned the amazing publication that Deborah Phillips worked on, Neurons to Neighborhoods. This really brought us to public awareness. It has really made people understand that little kids are not just cute and cooing and kind of rolling themselves around, but there are many things actually happening under the skin. We also know that the kind of development that occurs early in life is successive, that skills build upon one another. And so if we expect children to arrive at school ready to learn, then we need to be thinking about all of the things that happen before they're in school that promote those basic core life skills. Finally, I think one of the things that's particularly exciting in recent years is we know how strongly different areas of development are interconnected. If you're interested in cognitive development, you can't think about that without thinking about social and emotional development and how emotions shape the way in which we develop. And more recently, we're really beginning to see the intersections between social, emotional, cognitive development, and physical health across the lifespan. Things go well, there's much greater likelihood that you'll see benefits in all of those areas. Things don't go so well in the early years, and we see compromises in a number of these different areas, not just emotional or mental health, but also in terms of really life-threatening diseases that can happen. So why, if we're focusing on early childhood, why now? I think Joan alluded to this, and again, it's just that we are in a time where I think we're finally recognizing the tremendous structural and systemic inequalities that have existed historically. I think one of the reasons that the field, in spite of its longevity, has not made more progress is because we haven't really focused sufficiently on these core issues, on structural racism and inequality and how we can identify and dismantle it. And so that will be a major focus. But the other thing that I want to say is that not only do we know at this point that these inequities exist, we know that they begin very early in life, that they're not something that happens, again, when kids arrive at school on their first day of kindergarten, that we begin to see separations in well-being and how kids are doing very early in life. And we also know, and this is especially true now that we're coming out of this pandemic, that gaps have widened in terms of these inequities, so extremely important. Joan also alluded to the fact that right now, in this time, I think even though you can say we're coming out of the pandemic, we are certainly not coming out of a period of uncertainty. Indeed, I think we can talk about instability and uncertainty as part of the new normal. There are many people here, Megan Gunner, who's been one of my long-term colleagues and collaborators, another Stanford alum, is one of the leaders in the field who's shown how uncertain and unpredictable environments early in life can lead to lifelong impacts that don't necessarily just reverse themselves. And I think that understanding has had a huge impact on the field. Now that we're facing these times, I think we need to be proactive about understanding how those things are likely to affect things moving forward. And of course, the pandemic hasn't made things any easier. We know at this time that we're seeing a lot of learning loss. We're seeing a real high increase in mental health problems, and we expect that, again, left unaddressed, that those things will continue to widen many of these gaps. Our center has chosen, even though it's called the Center on Early Childhood, to focus on a broad span of development. We know that many of the things that affect lifelong health and learning and well-being begin during the prenatal period, and that experiences that are happening during that period can have a major influence on children's lives. But we also want to extend beyond this period of time before children start from formal education. I think one of the issues that the field has struggled with is this kind of segmentation, but we know that development is continuous. And so if we stop paying attention to kids at the point where they start school, we're really missing that critical transition period where things can go in a number of directions. That's the reason for our span. Dan alluded, I think, to some of the opportunities that exist right now, and really the kind of dazzling discoveries that are happening in science that are allowing us to potentially make progress. I just want to quickly talk about some work that's related to the center that's extremely, I think, a good example of how science can really help us understand mechanisms that can make a difference in kids' lives. So this is work that was done with young children in the foster care system. One of the things that was particularly noteworthy about the experiences of people working with these young children is that when they were in educational environments, they did not really seem to benefit from information coming in from the world around them, from their peers, from teachers. It was as if it wasn't getting through. And I think one of the conclusions that was often expressed by those who were working with these children was that they just didn't seem to care. They were disengaged. They didn't seem to really think about what was going to matter or what wasn't going to matter. So the work that was done involved measuring electrical activity on the surface of the scalp that corresponds to brain activity in response to a computer task where kids were getting feedback when they made mistakes. And what we saw looking at foster kids was where there would expect to be a burst of brain activity where kids are making a mistake on this computer task. And we saw that in typical kids. In kids who had these really difficult early experiences, there was no difference between when they made mistakes and when they didn't. It was like they weren't tuning in to the feedback that they were getting from the computer that said that they weren't doing things correctly. So we knew that there was an underlying mechanism of why kids like this were struggling in school. It wasn't because they didn't care. It wasn't because they weren't motivated. It was because they weren't processing information in their environment. So we created a program that provided a really high level of information and feedback to these kids. And lo and behold, in the span of a summer program, we saw really the correction of this tendency. We saw when kids came back into the lab and did the same task that we saw much more typical levels of brain response in response to feedback. And these kids also did much better in school with peers and so forth when we followed them over time. I think this is a good indication of why we should be hopeful, because there is plenty of evidence of brain plasticity in the context of early stress, and it's possible to design learning environments without necessarily creating things that are overly complex and sort of not scalable. As soon as you have the knowledge, I think it can lead to the positive kinds of design. So our center will have really 4 guiding principles. This is an ecological model. We believe that all children should ultimately achieve their full development, and we think we'll get there by making sure that adults in the lives of children have the supports and services that they need, that communities are providing the context in terms of the programs that are available, and are equitable to really make sure that parents and children and other adults are getting what they need, and then that there's alignment among policies and programs. So if all of this is sort of promising and hopeful, I think this begs the question of why do we need a new vision? The reason we need a new vision is because even though there's a lot of knowledge that I think we all carry with us about early brain development, about the reversibility of early life stress, there are still many disconnects that we see out there between what the science has been showing and what's actually happening. First and foremost, as I said, we know that development is continuous across the lifespan, that things that happen early continue to affect things throughout life. But yet when we look at the healthcare system, when we look at the education system, things are very segmented. We go from prenatal maternal health care, where the mom is the focus, to pediatrics, where the child is focused. And oftentimes, there's no connection between the two. We see kids in early care environments that are formal and informal, going to preschool, and then transitioning to kindergarten, oftentimes with no handoffs from one to another. So the continuous nature of development is not matched with the way in which these systems are organized. We also, as I said, know that all of these areas of development are highly interconnected, and yet when we look at mental health, when we look at learning, when we look at physical health, separate systems that don't speak to each other. where there are many barriers to have that kind of holistic approach that Joan was mentioning has been sort of on people's radar for decades and decades now. We know also of the importance of early relational health. Thank you, David Willis, for coining that term and getting it on everybody's radar. And yet, in spite of how much we know that early relationships are really the context in which children will either thrive or have difficulties, many of our programs and policies still to this day focus on the individual child and seeing problems as residing within the child, seeing successes as residing within the child rather than in their larger environments. These things need to change. And finally, even though there is well-documented work on the return on investments that can come from early childhood programs, we still see that the largest investments do not go to the early years. They go to K-12. And this is true for both public and private sector investments. So the investments are, even though we know that they'll pay the biggest dividends in early childhood, they're not going there. Those are some reasons. There's some other reasons as well. And I think this brings us today. First of all, the word about kind of what early development brings to the kind of the lifespan is something that's been understood in science in recent years. This knowledge has existed in communities for a long time. It's simply something where the pieces are now being put together. But in that context, communities are saying, telling us what's going on is one piece of the puzzle, but we want to be in the driver's seat. We want to be able to really craft the solutions. We think we have many of the solutions. And so the idea that only good ideas come from research environments, from more privileged places, I think is something that a lot of communities are starting to question. That's one reason why we need a new vision. Similarly, many of the early career researchers, students and graduate students that are here at Stanford and other places, want their work to have social impact. They're not disinterested in science. They're compelled by science, but they want their science to really have meaning in the world. And so when Dean Schwartz talks about an accelerator that can get research knowledge out into the world, this is exactly what's being demanded by this next generation of scholars that's coming into the field. Entrepreneurs, innovators, we know that there's a huge private sector, Dan mentioned industry, where there's amazing work being done. That work oftentimes, because it comes more from a business orientation, is oriented to getting big quickly, but not so much to understanding impacts. And so the idea that there are pieces of the puzzle that are needed there is critical. And then we know we have many funders in this room today that there's more of a demand for showing not just giving the money away, but what's it going to do? What will happen when that money comes through? And so all of those things are leading us to think that what we really need to do in the context of this center is to develop pathways, strategies, tools to really get things moving in a positive direction. And that will really be our mission moving forward. So let me just tell you, first and foremost, and again, I think this is just a process of getting started. So one of the things you will hear throughout the day, I think, is that our center is very much organic, evolving, and iterative in nature. And we feel like the field of early childhood should be as well. We're starting with these topics and themes. We will undoubtedly continue to evolve as we begin the work and as the work changes us and those of us that we're working with. But first and foremost, and I think this theme is now something that you've heard repeatedly and will continue to, the starting point, if we want to make progress, is to identify and dismantle the inequalities that exist in society and that are long-standing. I'm self-conscious of saying that as a white male who's a leader of the center, and I offer my commitment to really do everything that I can and that our center can to address these long-standing issues. I don't think if we start there, or rather if we don't start there, I think our progress will by definition be limited. We also have the potential, I think, because of the strengths that exist here at Stanford, to make significant progress in terms of how we measure development in early childhood. One of the panels will focus on that. Also, how we evaluate impacts, thinking about new ways to produce evidence more quickly and to redefine what evidence means. Those are cross-cutting themes. The focal areas will not surprise you. Again, I think they were in that 1960 memo that Joan mentioned. I think that what's different is that when we think about early learning environments, when we think about the kind of network of formal and informal supports that exist in communities, and we think about the healthcare sector, which finally people are recognizing as a place for transformative impacts, we don't think about them as integrated. And so another big effort on our part will be to really look at the intersections of these different focal areas and how we can work across them. And you'll hear in one of our panels on pediatrics that Lisa Chamberlain is leading, really what some of the cutting edge thinking is in this area. The other thing that I want to say very clearly is that the focus of this work, in order to really matter, has to be on place-based partnerships. In the context of the pandemic, we have heard repeatedly, learned repeatedly that communities, again, are rising up to take on the challenges of the uncertainty and stability. They want to work with academic partners. They want to work with policy and advocacy partners. And if we begin to bring those together in the places where there's motivation for change, we think that is a key ingredient to really making a difference. So our work will be focused on place-based partnerships locally as well as around the country, domestically, and ultimately internationally. The other thing that's critical, I think, is what do we mean by early learning? If this is a center on early childhood, where should we focus? When people think about young children learning, they tend to think about formal learning environments, so center or home-based preschools, for example. But children learn in a variety of contexts. We know that families, parents, and other adults in children's lives are children's first teachers, so we need to focus on family. We know that many children have extended families, not just one or two parents, but many others in their lives. And we also know that care is often provided in many informal contexts by families, friends, and neighbors who are not necessarily getting paid, or if they are still doing this in ways that are not structured in the same way. And we need to elevate and celebrate those care arrangements and not just the formal and licensed ones. There are also amazing and transformative examples of how early learning environments can include places that are out in the community. Here you see, again, a local waiting room at a pediatric clinic. This is a photo that Lisa Chamberlain shared with me about what you can do to transform a mundane, boring, stressful place for parents and children into a place where kids can have a positive experience and where parents and children can learn together. On the right, you see a laundromat. Too Small to Fail is an organization that has done incredible work working with the Coin Laundry Association, putting pop-up learning environments in laundromats. Parents are there with their kids, they're sitting around. Again, rather than going bonkers or having screen time, this is an opportunity for learning. So we can think about all these places as being leveraged. As I mentioned, our work will be place-based and fundamentally will involve developing partnerships. We think that team building is one of the most important processes that can happen, and we know that expertise is critical. I think in a room like this, we often think of expertise as, oh, so we'll have some professors, and we'll have some doctors and some educators, but there's expertise in communities. There's expertise here today. Anthony Queen, a parent advocate and parent himself, is here all the way from Michigan. Sharon Nielsen is here, a really strong advocate and early childhood provider herself. I actually just want to do a little bit of a round of applause to acknowledge all of the work that they're doing and their expertise and how it can contribute to the learning. Incredible and extremely important. So we need to be team builders. We also need to be tool makers. The field has some good things that can go out there, but we need to respond to the needs that we see as they evolve. And those things aren't going to come if we just sort of sit passively back. I think one of the things that our team has learned over time is that if we don't continue to evolve new strategies, we're really going to have limited potential. Two examples of some tools that we've built in recent years. Joan alluded to a survey that we did. We started it in the context of the pandemic, national survey. We surveyed over 1,000 households on a weekly basis for the first 6 months. Then we went to every other week. Then we went to monthly. The survey continues. It started as a way of bearing witness to what households were going through in the context of the pandemic. It shifted to really a tool for listening to and amplifying what adults in the lives of young children say is going on. The survey started with just a national focus. We've actually been approached by many communities who say, we think the data is useful. We want it for just our own community. So Anthony Queen's community in Kent County, Michigan is running a version of the survey just for Kent County families, and we see this happening elsewhere. Next month, we will launch a California-based survey, very similar, where we're going to be surveying 10,000 families on a monthly basis over the next 3 years, providing a wealth of information as we go through this amazing social experiment of universal transitional kindergarten about how that's affecting parents, how it's affecting kids, in ways that we think can make it better, not question whether it's going to work or not in a binary way, but provide information that will lead to it improving. That same kind of feedback that Dan mentioned, that Joan mentioned, that is how we learn as individuals, it's how we can learn as a society, and it's certainly how our center plans to learn. That's one example. A second example of a tool that we've built is that we've really worked hard and long over the last few years to think about how to reconfigure what we mean by evidence, so that evidence and the development of evidence, research in the context of community programs, in the context of understanding what's going well and what needs attention, can be put into the hands of community members, and that capacity can be developed to do the same science that's done at the level that's done here and done well in communities. And so we're really thinking about evidence as a tool for learning, not a tool for proving that something works, which I think is where we've been at for too long, and as something, to use the accelerator term, that we can move a lot more quickly, that will allow more people access and therefore fundamentally be more equitable. And we're doing this in the context of many community partnerships where we're working on how do you evaluate impacts? How do you measure change in early childhood in ways that are accessible to those communities? So I think that kind of tool building is critical. And finally, I think this is the third, so tool makers and team builders. And the last part is wayfinders. And again, I see this as something that we will all do together as a community, that we cannot succeed if we're just kind of wandering around. And that the way forward is going to require looking ahead, looking back, making mistakes, being open to learning from those mistakes, but identifying ways that the field can continue to really zero in on the areas that are most needed is really critical for what we're doing. We hope over the course of today and in follow-ups that, again, that you will provide input to us. One of the center's main components of its initial operating model is something called the Early Childhood X cycle. Everything at Stanford has an X after it, so we call it this ECX. The idea is early childhood and then a variety of things. We want to pick specific focal topics to work on in the center and be able to make progress on them. And we'll develop a variety of new tools to be able to do that. But part of the effort is really to figure out where are there in place-based settings or in the context of scientific research that's yielding new insights, where are there particular opportunities to make rapid progress? And where are the intractable problems, things that people have been working on for the longest time and can't make a difference? Those are the things that we really want to hear about from you, because in order to have a sense of what we really can work on and make the biggest progress, that's not going to be something that's going to happen in an echo chamber. It really needs many, many inputs. So I encourage you and invite you to join us, to celebrate today with us, to keep moving forward in terms of all of your incredible commitments to early childhood. I can only say that I have deep gratitude to all of you for the work that you do, and to Stanford University for making something that I think could not happen anywhere else happen here. I just, the sun is shining, it smells good outside, the temperature's warming up. It just feels like a beginning. And I really think that the slide that Joan showed at the end of her talk really says it all, that this is really an opportunity to move forward in ways that we haven't before. So thank you. I'm really looking forward to the panels and to everything that follows.